Lawmaker demands transparency on deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. Full investigative report. Rethink report. In a move that has raised significant questions about the use of wartime legislation in domestic immigration policy, Representative Jamie Raskin, ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, is demanding a full accounting from the Trump administration over its recent deportation of 137 Venezuelan nationals. These individuals were removed under the Alien Enemies Act, a law dating back to 1798. Originally intended for wartime powers, the administration has claimed that those deported were members of the Venezuelan criminal organization Tren de Aragua, but legal experts, immigrant rights advocates, and members of Congress are questioning both the legality of these deportations and the truth behind the gang affiliations. This report investigates the origins of the law being used, the details of the deportation operation, the legal and ethical implications, and the broader consequences for U.S. immigration policy, civil liberties, and due process. The Alien Enemies Act, a 226-year-old law revived the Alien Enemies Act is part of the Alien and Sedition Act signed into law by President John Adams in 1798. It grants the president the power to detain or deport non-citizens from countries deemed enemies of the United States during times of declared war. It has historically been used in rare and extreme circumstances, including the internment of Japanese, German, and Italian nationals during World War II. It has never before been used in the context of non-declared war or applied to specific criminal organizations. The Trump administration's use of this law represents an unprecedented reinterpretation, one that effectively expands the executive's power to bypass traditional immigration and judicial processes by labeling individuals as enemy aliens without a formal state of war or public trial. The deportation of 137 Venezuelans. According to government sources, the 137 Venezuelans were deported after being identified as members or affiliates of the Tren de Aragua gang, a violent transnational criminal organization that originated in Venezuela's prisons and has expanded into multiple countries across South America. The administration claims these individuals posed a serious and ongoing threat to public safety and national security. They were detained and deported rapidly, with minimal public disclosure or opportunity for legal challenge.
However, Representative Jamie Raskin is calling this justification into question. In a letter to Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf and Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, Raskin demanded a full accounting of the deportations, including access to the immigration and criminal records of those deported, the legal rationale used to classify them as enemy aliens, the sources of intelligence linking them to Tren de Aragua, the funding mechanisms used to facilitate their removal, including why they were flown to El Salvador rather than directly to Venezuela. Raskin argues that this action raises serious constitutional concerns about the use of executive authority, due process rights, and adherence to domestic and international human rights standards. Questions about due process. Advocates and legal experts have raised alarm over the apparent absence of legal proceedings in these deportations. In many cases, deportees were not granted hearings before an immigration judge. Instead, they were subject to what some are calling summary removal based solely on classified intelligence and executive discretion. This lack of judicial oversight, critics argue, violates both U.S. constitutional protections and international human rights obligations. Labeling people as threats based on untested evidence and deporting them without due process is not national security, it's authoritarianism, said one immigration attorney who requested anonymity due to fear of reprisal. The political context and motivations. This action occurs against the backdrop of President Trump's aggressive immigration agenda and his efforts to consolidate executive authority. By invoking the Alien Enemies Act, the administration is signaling that it is willing to use extreme legal measures to achieve its goals, especially in an election year when immigration policy remains a central political issue. Critics suggest the administration may be using the threat of gang violence as a political tool to justify sweeping deportations and reinforce hardline rhetoric about immigrants and crime. Tren de Aragua is indeed a known criminal organization, but the lack of transparency surrounding how these individuals were identified as affiliates has drawn intense skepticism. Human rights implications. International human rights groups, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, have expressed concern that these deportations may violate the United Nations Convention Against Torture, which prohibits returning individuals to countries where they may face persecution, torture, or inhumane treatment. Conditions in Venezuela are widely recognized as severe. Deporting individuals without thorough case-by-case review may place them in direct danger, especially if they are falsely identified as gang members. El Salvador, where they were flown, is also a country struggling with high crime rates and limited capacity to process foreign nationals.
What's next? Oversight and Accountability. Raskin has set a deadline for the administration to provide full documentation of the deportations. If the administration refuses or fails to comply, Raskin may pursue subpoenas in public hearings. Legal advocacy groups are also preparing to file lawsuits challenging the use of the Alien Enemies Act and seeking to locate deported individuals who may have been wrongfully removed. Meanwhile, the broader public debate continues. Should a centuries-old wartime law be used in a modern immigration context? Does national security justify abandoning due process and legal transparency? And what safeguards exist to prevent abuse of executive power? Conclusion: the constitutional stakes. This story goes far beyond the deportation of 137 Venezuelans. It is a test of how far a government can stretch the law to enforce its political agenda. It raises urgent questions about constitutional rights, immigration justice, and the proper limits of executive authority. As the investigation unfolds, Rethink Report will continue to bring you the facts, context, and voices that matter. Follow Rethink Report for the full story.